On June 13, 2025, the world watched in shock and disbelief as Israel launched a direct, surprise airstrike deep inside Iran. A move that shattered decades of shadow warfare and covert operations between the two nations. For years, Israel and Iran had waged a hidden conflict, relying on cyber attacks, sabotage, and proxy forces to avoid open confrontation. But on this day, the rules changed forever. This was no covert operation or proxy battle. It was an open assault on Iranian soil, crossing a red line few thought would be breached. The world had grown accustomed to a tense but predictable standoff, but this strike marked a dramatic escalation, thrusting the region into a new and dangerous era. Israel claimed preemption, citing intelligence of an imminent Iranian missile attack. Officials insisted that the strike was necessary to protect Israeli citizens from a threat that was both real and immediate, and that waiting any longer could have been catastrophic. But the scale and precision of the strikes suggested a broader goal, one that went beyond mere self-defense. Israel appeared determined to systematically dismantle Iran's offensive capabilities, targeting not just missile launch sites, but also command centers, radar installations, and key infrastructure. The age of deniability was over. No longer could either side hide behind plausible deniability or shadowy proxies. The world's leaders scrambled to respond, convening emergency meetings and issuing urgent calls for restraint. But the genie was out of the bottle. Israeli jets struck command centers and missile sites, signaling a shift from containment to direct military degradation. The operation was meticulously planned, with simultaneous strikes designed to cripple Iran's ability to retaliate quickly or effectively. The world now faced a new reality. Israel and Iran were at war, and the consequences would ripple far beyond their borders. Global markets trembled, oil prices surged, and millions wondered if this was the spark that would ignite a much larger conflict. This act of aggression set off a chain reaction, testing Israel's gamble that it could deter retaliation through overwhelming force. Military analysts debated whether Israel's show of strength would prevent further escalation or provoke an even more dangerous response from Tehran. The attack was not an end, but a beginning, a spark to a powder keg decades in the making. The long-simmering hostilities between Israel and Iran had finally erupted into open warfare, with the potential to draw in regional and global powers. Now, all eyes turned to Iran, waiting for its inevitable response. The streets of Tehran buzzed with anxiety as the Iranian military mobilized, and the world braced for what might come next. The Middle East had entered uncharted territory, with the specter of wider war looming over the region. The world could only watch, uncertain of what the next day would bring. Israel's operation was ruthless and calculated, a display of military precision honed over decades of conflict. The mission was not just about sending a message, it was about fundamentally altering the balance of power in the region. Every sortie, every target, was chosen to maximize impact and minimize the window for an Iranian response. Israeli forces zeroed in on the core of Iran's missile and drone programs, seeking to dismantle the infrastructure that underpinned Tehran's long-range threat. These were not random strikes. They were the result of months of intelligence gathering and meticulous planning, designed to cripple Iran's ability to project power beyond its borders. In Kermanshah, Israeli warplanes struck command centers and storage facilities with devastating accuracy, aiming to cripple Iran's long-range strike capability. The city, a hub for military logistics, was left reeling as key nodes in Iran's command network were reduced to rubble. The strikes reached as far as Yazd, deep in the Iranian heartland, sending a clear and chilling message. Nowhere in Iran was safe from Israeli reach. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical destruction, shaking the confidence of Iran's military leadership. The most critical blow landed on the Imam Hussein Strategic Missile Command Center, a heavily fortified site believed to house Iran's most advanced ballistic missiles. Its destruction was a symbolic and strategic victory, striking at the very heart of Iran's deterrence capability. By decapitating Iran's command structure, Israel hoped to sow chaos and disrupt any coordinated response. Communications were severed and confusion reigned in the aftermath as Iranian commanders scrambled to assess the damage and re-establish control. The 9-day aerial campaign was relentless, with Israeli jets dominating the skies both day and night. Their presence was a constant reminder of Israel's technological edge and its willingness to use overwhelming force. But as the strikes intensified, civilian casualties mounted. Areas near military sites were not spared, and the human cost quickly became apparent, fueling outrage, fear, and a growing sense of vulnerability among ordinary Iranians. Over 400 Iranians were killed, including senior military leaders whose loss would be felt across the armed forces. The funerals became rallying points for both grief and anger, uniting the population in mourning and defiance. Israel bet that by destroying key nodes, any Iranian retaliation would be disorganized and ineffective. Analysts in Tel Aviv watched satellite feeds, searching for signs of a coordinated counterattack, confident that Iran's response would be hamstrung by the scale of the damage. But in focusing on hardware and leadership, Israel may have underestimated Iran's reserves and its resolve to strike back. Beneath the surface, Iran's military was already regrouping, determined to prove that its will could not be so easily broken. The stage was set for Iran's countermove, and the world braced for what would come next. Iran's response was swift and ferocious. The Revolutionary Guard unleashed a massive barrage of missiles and drones, overwhelming Israel's air defenses. At the forefront was the Khyber-Shekan missile, fast, maneuverable, and deadly accurate. 54 ballistic missiles were fired in under 30 minutes, a scale never before seen. Iranian missiles struck Ben Gurion Airport, military research centers, and command hubs across Israel. The message was clear: nowhere in Israel was safe. Israel's famed Iron Dome and arrow systems were saturated. Many projectiles got through. Iran's retaliation shattered Israel's sense of security and proved its capabilities were far from neutralized. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. The high-tech war quickly became a nightmare for civilians. In Israel, air raid sirens sent millions scrambling for shelter as missiles rained down. Tel Aviv saw buildings flattened. Haifa's industrial sites burned. Over 9 days, at least 24 Israelis were killed, with many more wounded. Emergency services struggled to keep up amid constant attacks. In Iran, Israeli airstrikes caused significant collateral damage, sparking mass evacuations from Tehran. Highways clogged as families fled the capital, fearing further bombardment. Both nations faced scenes of panic, displacement, and mourning. The lines between combatant and civilian blurred, and trauma spread on both sides. Resilience mixed with fear and anger in Israel, defiance and dread in Iran. The true cost was measured in shattered lives and collective trauma. Iran's relentless missile barrage pushed Israel to the brink. The Khyber-Shekan exposed vulnerabilities in Israel's defenses, and public fear mounted. Realizing it couldn't win alone, Israel's government formally requested direct U.S. military intervention. This was more than a call for aid. It was a plea for America to strike Iran and tip the balance. Israel framed the crisis as a threat to global stability and U.S. interests, invoking Iran's nuclear ambitions. The request internationalized the conflict, putting immense pressure on Washington. For years, U.S.-Israel ties had meant support and arms sales. Now Israel wanted boots in the fight. The decision fell to President Trump, known for his hardline stance on Iran. The world watched, waiting for America's answer. The stakes had never been higher. The U.S. response was immediate and overwhelming. On June 21, 2025, President Trump launched Operation Midnight Hammer, a massive aerial assault on Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Over 125 U.S. aircraft, including B-2 stealth bombers, struck Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The U.S. used its most powerful bunker-buster bombs and Tomahawk missiles, devastating Iran's nuclear sites. American officials claimed the strikes crippled Iran's nuclear program, though Iran insisted key assets had been moved. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed catastrophic damage. The operation marked the largest Western attack on Iran since 1979, escalating the conflict to a global crisis. Whether the strikes ended Iran's nuclear ambitions or simply delayed them remained uncertain. Operation Midnight Hammer sent shockwaves through global markets, triggering a cascade of panic and uncertainty. Investors scrambled to make sense of the rapidly unfolding events, as stock indices plummeted and financial newsrooms buzzed with urgent updates. The world's major exchanges saw billions wiped out in minutes, and the sense of instability was palpable from New York to Tokyo. Oil prices soared to levels not seen in years, as fears of a wider Middle East war and a possible closure of the Strait of Hormuz gripped traders. The energy sector was thrown into chaos, with companies rushing to secure supply lines and governments activating emergency reserves. Iran threatened to close the strait, a narrow waterway through which nearly a quarter of the world's oil shipments pass. The mere possibility of this choke point being blocked sent shockwaves through energy markets and raised alarms in capitals worldwide. Iran vowed severe retaliation, promising not only military action, but also activating sleeper cells in the US and launching sophisticated cyber attacks. Intelligence agencies scrambled to assess the credibility of these threats, while cities braced for the possibility of attacks on critical infrastructure. The US responded by issuing global security alerts, ordering embassies to go on high alert, and evacuating staff from high-risk countries. Diplomatic missions became fortresses overnight as armored vehicles and armed guards appeared at embassy gates. Air travel was thrown into disarray as airlines expanded no-fly zones across the region. Flights were cancelled or rerouted, leaving terminals eerily empty and passengers stranded, unsure when it would be safe to travel again. The conflict was no longer regional. Its effects rippled worldwide. Global trade slowed as shipping routes were reconsidered, and businesses everywhere braced for economic aftershocks. Israel briefly reopened Ben Gurion Airport for repatriation flights, allowing foreign nationals to escape the escalating crisis. But the sense of crisis only deepened, as families were separated and uncertainty grew. The world braced for Iran's next move. Would it target US bases, close Hormuz, or strike inside America? Military analysts debated possible scenarios, while news anchors delivered updates with growing urgency. Instead of ending the conflict, the US strikes had opened a new, more perilous chapter. The region teetered on the edge of a wider war, and the world watched, holding its breath. Tension and uncertainty gripped the globe as leaders scrambled to prevent further escalation, and ordinary people everywhere wondered what tomorrow would bring. US intervention split the world. Allies praised the strikes. Adversaries condemned them as reckless aggression. Russia, China, and Iran's proxies denounced the attacks, while the UN Security Council was paralyzed by division. Anti-war protests erupted in US cities, and political debate raged over the legality of the strikes. The crisis deepened global polarization, exposing rifts at home and abroad. The world was more fractured and more anxious than ever. June 2025 changed the world. The Israel-Iran war was now a terrifying reality, and US intervention had made it a global flashpoint. The risk of escalation loomed. Iran could strike US forces, block Hormuz, or unleash cyber attacks. Each move risked a spiral of violence with no easy exit. The US strikes may have pushed Iran's nuclear ambitions deeper underground, fueling a regional arms race. The conflict's ripple effects touched every corner of the globe. Diplomacy seemed distant. Hope was in short supply. The crisis was far from over. Perhaps it had only just begun.